Tennessee took it to LSU in Death Valley 40-13. And the question coming into this game, set up Saturday, right? It was set up for Tennessee. They have Alabama this coming week, coming to Knoxville. Whole lot of implications on that game, but they have to go to Death Valley first against an LSU team that has a really good head coach in Brian Kelly, a lot of talent under the hood. They've been feisty all year long. And Tennessee, very similar to what we saw Texas do, clock in, clock out, give us that W, we're out of here, let's hit the road. I was extremely impressed by Tennessee yesterday. Some of the deciding factors, that front seven for Tennessee, we talked about the back end of this defense all week long. What are they going to do? They got Keyshawn Butte over there. They got Malik Neighbors over there. They got some dudes, right? We haven't seen it yet, but they got some powder kegs on the outside. What happens if there's a spark? What happens if they get rolling? That front seven just said, no, we got you. Took so much pressure off what they asked those DBs to do because they sacked the quarterbacks 5 times. They had 9 tackles for a loss. They allowed 55 yards rushing. That is dominance in the trenches. And that just makes your life so much easier if you're a defensive back. Because if you're Jaden Daniels, I know we talked about him having to unhitch the wagon. Keyshawn Butte is a peacock, gotta let him fly. It never really got to that. He never really looked comfortable. He was running around half the time, it seemed like. There was so much that was made easier for the secondary because of what those front seven for the Vols were able to do. Now, I want to make sure we know the LSU offensive line has been musical chairs as of late. It's like 4 or 5 different lineups the entire year. Like every single game, you got somebody new playing tackle and guard. So not necessarily a recipe for success for LSU. We'll get to more of them in a minute. But regardless, you don't get to control who you line up against. For Tennessee to play the way they did and answer the call to action in a very big week in what could have been a setup week, you got to be encouraged. That was obviously a big impact in the game. We said it all week. We sat right here. We spoke into this microphone. We said it 4 or 5 different ways. LSU can't start slow. You just can't. Like, we love the heart. We love the grit. We like to think that we're kind of a heart and grit program ourselves, kind of a blue-collar program ourselves. But you can't start slow against Tennessee. Why? Because they score 48 a game. One of the best offenses in the country. If you spot them any points, we've seen your offense have issues. And that was the exact thing that played out to a T yesterday in Death Valley. Opening kick, Jack Besh, ball's on the turf. Tennessee ball going that way. Like seconds later, it's points. Bad operation. Can't do it. And ultimately, LSU spotted Tennessee 20. And at that point, it's never over till it's over. But if you are watching the game at home, you're sort of hovering your hand over that remote and saying, there's probably some other games on I could watch. Let's see if LSU pulls an LSU special. But at that point in the game, I mean, LSU signed their own death warrant. Like, that was just the reality of it. You can't spot Usain Bolt 20 meters in a 100-yard dash and expect to catch him. Because that was, in all honesty, the scenario yesterday in Baton Rouge. LSU is very much an unfinished product. We're going to talk about that later in this segment, but as a whole, what they're doing right now is not something Brian Kelly will sign off on going forward. Jaden Daniels has got to figure it out. He threw for 300 yards yesterday. His QBR was 56. It's not a winning QBR. Averaged like 6 yards an attempt. There's a lot of issues at LSU. There's a lot to be sorted out at LSU, but we'll get to more of that in a minute. Going back to the Tennessee side of things, they just consistently dominated their matchups on the outside. It was a big storyline throughout the week. Cedric Tillman, he's questionable, gets the tightrope surgery. Half of us don't even really know what that means, but it's supposed to help with his recovery. Tua had it, so Cedric Tillman got it. It's probably going to be a good thing long-term. Didn't play in the game. So your number one receiver, yet again, is unavailable for Hendon Hooker. And so you kind of start to wonder, well, hey, this LSU secondary, maybe, just maybe, they can stack up okay. They've got some guys that have transferred in, played a lot of football. I mean, we'll see. It's going to be a tall order for these Tennessee wide receivers. Tennessee just dominated. I mean, Jalen Hyatt was unconscious. Brew McCoy played violent football yesterday. I mean, had over 100 yards receiving, was just grown manning those LSU DBs. Like, it was unreal how dominant they were on the outside. And Hendon Hooker didn't actually even light up the stat sheet, threw for less than 300 yards, was really efficient with the football, but I was just so impressed by how open they were able to get themselves. That's going to be crucial for them the rest of the way. That's going to be a big deal to be able to win on the outside, because look at who they have next week. Alabama comes to town. They've got their own issues in the secondary. To have so much confidence to this point in the season, to have so many good reps under your belt for guys that would typically be wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, it's a very big deal. Also should be mentioned, Jabari Small ran the ball like a grown man yesterday. When you're running the ball at around 4 or 5 yards a carry like he was, that just makes it easier to throw the football. I was extremely impressed by this offense. Yet again for Tennessee, they're going to be a problem for whoever else has to play them the rest of the way. That includes Alabama, and that includes Georgia. So let's talk about this here. Tennessee has exemplified on multiple occasions a killer instinct. We saw them sort of let Florida back in the game at times, but when it's time to win, when it's money on the line, all the chips are stacked, Tennessee, you got to make it happen. They've shown multiple times they're capable of going for the jugular. And in just this season alone, if you were to just silo the 2022 season and say your resume versus Alabama's and Georgia's, I'm looking at Tennessee. They got 3 ranked wins, 3 pretty convincing ranked wins. The Pitt game went to overtime. They were on the road. I still credit that to be a very credible win. I think it's time we start changing the way that we talk about this team, because they don't have the skins on the wall historically, meaning the last 5 to 10 years that a Georgia does or an Alabama does. Those coaches have some hardware on their on their fingers. Got some rings on their fingers. Kind of ruined the punchline there, but you hear what I'm saying. They don't have the same goodwill that maybe some of those teams do. You kind of trust that Georgia will turn it on. You kind of trust that Alabama will turn it on. Folks, Tennessee has got it turned on right now, and this thing's humming. This thing's operating at full capacity. So Bama comes to town this week. College game day is going to be there. You got Pat McAfee going nuts. Kirk Herbstreit on the call. I don't actually know if he's on the call, but he's on the college game day set. It's going to be a very big week. And regardless of what happens in that game, I fully expect Tennessee to throw some very solid punches. I don't think it'll be a blowout. I don't think it'll be a wide gap between these two programs. Tennessee's come a long way in 2 years under Josh Heupel. We got to start talking about them in that same breath with Georgia and Alabama in the 2022 season. Mic drop right there. For LSU, the rest of the year is, hey, do your best. And that sounds sort of condescending. I don't mean it in a condescending way, I assure you. The reality of it is Brian Kelly is here to fix things. You got issues at LSU. Shea Dixon put it very articulately. He's over at our On3 LSU site, Bengal Tiger. Go subscribe there and get a membership there if you haven't yet. He basically said it how I think a lot of us are thinking about it. LSU has rented a quarterback for this year, getting Jaden Daniels out of the portal. They're going to be better in the future. Brian Kelly is here to get this program headed in the right direction. They're going to take their lumps this year. You're 4-2. A lot of teams take their lumps much more like an Oklahoma team does. Just getting run down each and every week. That's not how LSU's looking. Now, they have issues inside, of course, but they've got a lot of pieces to work with. They're always going to be capable of giving you a scare, and that's why we talked about Tennessee the way that we talked about them this week going to Death Valley. That's why the line was at 3 points for Tennessee. LSU is, in my mind, the equivalent of like a big middle schooler, and you know who I'm talking about. They're like 6'4" in the 7th grade. They're touching the rim. They probably got a little bit of facial hair. But the reality is they're still kind of growing into their appendages. They're still sort of figuring out how to have the right hand-eye coordination and how to play the sports and how to operate all of this size that they now have. That's LSU. It's not a matter of talent within that program. They got some guys. They got some youth to go with that, but they got some guys that can play. It's going to be a matter of them figuring out how to work with all this talent they have and doing things Brian Kelly's way. Because dude has proven he's a winner. If nothing else, he's a winner. And he's in a place where he's going to have a lot of resources to be able to win and win consistently in the future. But for 2022, got to take your lumps, got to grow into all that talent. Nonetheless, Tennessee goes to Death Valley, gets a convincing win, 40-13 over the Tigers. And College game day going back to Knoxville, just down the road from us, Nick. It's going to be a good one. I'm very, very excited for that. Tennessee and Alabama will be a full feature-length movie. I promise you, we will do a full breakdown. We will do a full preview. You're going to want to make sure you're on this channel to get all of your insight for that game. All right, so subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.